Hey guys, my name is Leon and I'm here to show you how to make a chat application using ReactJS and Socket.io. For those of you that don't know what Socket.io is or ReactJS is just a flexible, declarative, efficient JavaScript library for building user interfaces. And Socket.io is just a WebSocket library that allows for bi-directional communication between the client and the server. That's just a really fancy way of saying that it allows for you to talk to the client or to the server from your client without having to make multiple HTTP requests. Traditionally speaking, when getting a web page from a server or getting Ajax data from a server, you would have to open the HTTP request, and then it would say, hey, what do you need? And then you would say, I need this, and then it would say, cool, here it is, and then it would close the connection, and then to get anything else, you would have to do it all over again. But with WebSockets, you stop that whole back and forth handshake thing over and over again and just make one handshake and then, listen to events that happen. So if I say I want to get something, it would say, cool, here it is, or it would say, hey, there's something that's updated, and then I would get that data from it, just like that. That's basically what WebSockets is in a very, very short kind of way to say it. So a few prerequisites for you and your computer are probably going to be NodeJS installed, as well as the Create React app package installed globally on your computer. And for you, you probably need to know like a little bit between beginner, intermediate, JavaScript, along with a little bit of ReactJS. And that's probably going to be it. So let's go ahead and get on to the coding.
To go ahead and create our React app, we're just going to type in create-react-app, and then we're going to type in the name of our app, and we're just going to call it the chat app, chat-app. So once that's done, we are going to just go ahead and run the app to see if it's working. So we're going to first cd into that directory, so cd chat app, and then we're going to type npm start, and it should go ahead and start a server on your computer. Sometimes it says something's already running on a port. You just type yes or Y, and it should open it up in a terminal or in the browser, and you should see the React stock beginning right there. Pretty easy. So now we're going to do a few things. So go ahead and stop that server by pressing Control C, and we're going to ls. We're going to go into source. We're going to delete a few things. We're going to delete the app. A lot of the main things that aren't going to be with our app. We're going to delete app.css, app.test, the logo.svg, and the index.css. Right, cool. And now we're going to open this in our favorite text editor. Mine is going to happen to be Sublime. So once we're in there, we got our app right here. Just going to go to app.js and get rid of that line and those two lines. Those are the imports that we just deleted from our thing. Also get rid of everything inside our render function of our React component right here. And I'm going to give this a class of container for right now, and just going to put an app right here. And also go into your index.js and take away the CSS import right there. Cool. So now we got to set up our HTTP server with our socket IO connected to it. So go ahead and make a new folder inside our source here, and we're going to say it's called server. Just call it server. Once you make that, make a file inside there. We're going to make two files. One's going to be our index.js, which is where we're going to start our server, and then make another file and save it as our socket manager, which is just going to be the manager of our socket. All right, once we have those things, we are going to go ahead and set up the server here. So we're going to make a variable called app, and it's going to be equal to require, and it's going to be HTTP. This is on the Socket.io website if you need to look more in depth into it. And we're just going to say create server, and then another variable for IO, require, and we're going to require sockets.io, and then we're going to put our call a function on that and put our app right inside there. And we're actually going to export this as well. Boom. And then we're going to have a port number I'm going to make it as process.env.port equals, not equals, or 3231. So this will set it to the variable set in the env file if we have that, or it's just going to set it to 3231. And then also we're going to get a variable from Socket Manager, called Socket Manager from Socket Manager, the file. I'm just going to say require and Socket Manager. All right, and finally we get into the IO stuff. So the first thing we need to do when it comes to IO, socket.io, we're going to have that variable that we made right up here that we got from socket.io. And we're going to say connection, and this is what's going to happen when we get to a connection. It's just so when there's a connection to the server, Socket Manager is going to happen, and I'll explain that in a second. But last but not least, we're going to say app.listen, and we're going to listen on port whatever, and have a function that happens when that happens, so we know it's on, and it's just going to clog connected to port, and then whatever our port is. Great. Now a little bit more code here. We got our socket manager, and we're just going to say right up here at the top, constant IO, and get that thing we just made inside our index.js that we exported, index.js and .io. Cool. And then we're going to export that socket manager that we have right here. This is the thing that we're exporting. Module.exports, and that's going to equal to a function that takes a socket. So what happens when the connection is established? IO sends a socket to a function, and this function is just going to be our socket manager in this point. And that socket is how we individualize what computer or what connection we have. So if I connect from the browser here, it'll have a certain socket ID, which I'll show you in a second. We're just going to clog the socket ID. So we're going to say socket ID plus and socket.id. All right, so in our package.json, we have a few things. We're going to need two things for our development dependencies. So here we have all this stuff, but we need a few things for our development and all those things. So let's go ahead and go to our terminal and install a few things. The first thing we're going to install is socket.io, uuid. All right, so once that's done, we're going to just install our dev dependencies. So we're going to say npm install dash save dev, and those are just going to be concurrently, which allows us to run two scripts at once pretty easily, and then nodemon, which is going to auto update our server as we work with it. All right, so now in our package.json, we are going to change our scripts a little bit. So here we go. We got our React script start at. It's just going to React. That's what started our server in the first place. Then we're going to make another script. We're going to change that to React. And we're going to make another script called server. And this is what's going to start our server with nodemon, so we don't have to start our server with node every time. It'll just restart it every time we change our server. So we say nodemon src. We're going into this src server and then index.js. Perfect. And then we're going to change this start script right up here to say npm. Sorry, this is what we're going to use concurrently. So concurrently, and then inside single quotes npm run react, and then also npm run server. All right, so I made a little mistake here. Before, it looks like I had a socket.manager without an A, so go ahead and rename that to socket with a manage with an A, and you can delete that file. And also in our index.js, this is supposed to be not connection. It was connection before, but make it on because that's what it actually is. Boom, and that's all we do. So usually I would use the start script, but for right now we're going to use React and server individually. So if we go back to our terminal, we got this. My server should still be running for my React app, and I'm going to start the other server. So I say npm run server. You should see that it starts, and all right. All right, guys, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and start connecting to our server. But first, we're going to make a component. It's called layout, and it's just going to hold layout and do a lot of the functionality for our app, our chat app here. And that layout component is going to have a title prop, and we're just going to say chat app baby with a capital A. And we're going to import that before we even make it, so we don't have to worry about the import later. So it's going to be import layout, and it's going to be inside components / layouts. All right, so let's go ahead and make that inside our source folder. We make a new folder called components, and inside there we're going to make a new file called layout. So save this as layout.js. And inside here we're going to make a React component. I have a nice little snippet for it that you can download. I'll put a link in the description for snippets so you don't have to type out and make a component like that all the time. And there we go. We got our render function. We're going to get our title from our props property, just like that. And we're going to say right here, we're just going to print out our title so we know that everything's working. I'm going to put a class name on this called container as well, because we're going to use styles later on in the video. And we don't need this anymore because we're giving it just one thing, the layout. If you look at everything, looks like I forgot to put default here. Perfect. And that should be it. If we go back to our app, here we are in our app and we have our nice chat app, baby. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and connect to the IO server right here in layout. So we're going to make a constructor for our component here, and it should have props, super props, and this dot state. This dot state is going to be equal to at the beginning. It's going to have a socket property. It's going to be equal to null, and then we're also going to have a function called init socket, and this is just going to initialize our socket for us, so we don't do it and we can do it whenever we want to. So right here, we're actually going to make this equal to an arrow function, so we don't have to worry about the context of this for this component. So now we say const socket. We're going to make a variable called const socket, and we're going to use IO here. So let's go ahead and import our socket.io. So right up here at the top, we say import IO from socket.io -client, just like that. And we're also going to make a variable up here called socket URL. And that's going to be equal to the URL to connect to our server. So socket URL is going to be equal to the URL of where our server is going to be, which is going to be on our local machine. So first, I'm going to just go ahead and make IO and say socket URL. And what's going to happen inside this init is we're going to set the state to socket, set this socket state. So it's this dot set state, and we're going to put in there socket. Perfect. Now, if I go to this, you'll see this is our server. This is where our server is going to be hosted. It could be localhost, it could be something else. But we're going to make it to that variable, and then to what we put our server to earlier, what it's running on, which is going to be 3231. So port 3231, just like that. So now we're going to say socket.on here, connect, and that's just something that happens every time the socket is connected to the server from our client. And we're just going to give it a arrow function, and we're going to clog connected. All right, so the last thing we need to do is call this init socket function. So in our component will mount lifecycle of React, we're going to call that function this.init socket. And guys, if I'm going too fast, it's really because this is just a code through or code along, and I'm not really going to try to teach you as much as I'm trying to show you how it works. If you have any questions, definitely just let me know. So now if we go to our socket right here, to our server, you can see that we have a socket.id right there. That's us connecting to the server. And then if we go to our here, we got connected in our console. All right, so next up, we're going to go ahead and add some styles to this. I already have some styles, and I'll link it down in the description. And it's right here. Just gonna get these styles from right here, copy it, and then make a folder. Actually, I don't need to make a folder. I'll just make a file, paste it in there, and save it as index.css. And boom, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and import that inside our app.js right here. And all you have to do for that is just import index.css. Perfect. If you go back to the app, it shouldn't look much different. Oh, looks like I gotta use / yes, relative path, and there we go. It just changed our font color, but it'll change a whole lot more once we start going on with our app. All right, so next we need to set up some constants for our events that we're going to be emitting back and forth between the client and server. So right here in our source folder, we're going to make a new file called, let's call it events.js, and it's just going to export an object exports, and that object is just going to have a lot of things. The first thing it's going to have is the action community underscore chat. It's also going to have the user connected, which it's going to happen whenever the user is connected. And also going to have message received and then message sent as well. And then user connected, disconnected, user disconnected, and typing if the user is typing, verify user to verify that the username they're going to use it's not used already, and log out if the user logs out. So then we're just going to make these pairs complete by doing this, and boom, and comma. And there we go. We got our constants. We won't have to touch that anymore for all our events that we are going to be emitting. So now in our layout, we are going to do two things. We're going to create a function for setting our user, for setting when our user logs in. We're going to set the user here. So we're going to say set user equals, put this arrow function, and that's going to take one parameter. It's going to be an object that has a ID and a name. It's going to be a user object. And what we need to do there is we need to get our socket from our state. And we're going to say socket.emit user connected, which we're going to go ahead and import in a second. And then this is also going to set our state of our user to that user that was passed in. And of course, right here at the top, we have to have an initial state for our user, which is just going to be null. Let's go ahead and import user connected from our invents.js. So user connected from up1 events. All right, so next we also need to have a way for the user to log out. So we're going to say log out equals, and then say this. And we're just going to set the state to null for that one. So set the state of user to null, just like that. We're also going to emit to the server that the user has logged out. Sockets equals this dot state, and then socket dot emit log out. Wow. Okay, and one more thing we're going to do for our emit function up here is we're going to pass in that user that is connected. So we're going to pass in a user that's going to be sent to the server to add to the list of users already logged in. All right, so next we're going to make some factory functions. And the way that works is we're just going to make a new file right inside here, inside our source folder, and we're just going to call it factories. Save it, factories.js. Great, and then inside factories, we're going to make a few functions, and I'll come right back with some documentation in a second. And we're back with our documentation. So we got three factories we're going to make here. We're going to make our create user, which just returns an object that has an ID, a name, and it's going to take a parameter of an object that has a string. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say const create user, and it's going to be equal to a function that takes an object that will have a user name, just a name, and that name is going to be equal to nothing originally. And then right here, we're just going to return an object. And we're going to need one thing. It's that library that we added earlier on from npm, which is the uuid. So we're going to make a constant up here called uuid v4. It's going to be equal to require, and it's going to be uuid /v4. Just like that, and that's just going to allow us to have unique IDs for all our users. So then right here, we're going to return an object. Oh, let's not do that. Return an object, and that object's going to have two things, and that's going to be an ID with a random ID right there, and then also the name, which is going to be passed from right here. And then next up, let's do our create message. Create message is const create message. That's going to be equal to another function. And that function is going to take a message. And that message is going to be blank at the beginning. And it's also going to take a sender, which also can be blank. And then boom, there we go. And then that's going to return an object with a ID from our uuid v4 and a time which is going to be a date not now for now. We're going to say new date dot now, and then message from our message up there, and sender. All right, so now right here at the bottom, I have a nice little function that I want to make, and it's going to be called getDate. And getDate is just going, or getTime, it's going to allow us to get the time and return it with this format. So our 24-hour time format from a date object. So we're going to say const get time equals, and that's just going to take in a date object. And let's do that. And we're going to return this nicely formatted string. All right, so what that does is it gets our hours from our dates. If I could type date in that get, and gets our hours, and then it also gets our minutes. And if the minutes are just like 1 or 2, it'll put a 0 in front of it, and then get the last part of those minutes. So even if it does say like 30 or something like that, it'll put a 0 in front of it and then only take the last two, just like that. This is perfect. So then we can use that right up here and we just say get time and then get our time like that. All right, last thing we need to do is have a create chat factory. So then we're going to say create chat equals, and that's going to take a parameter that's going to say messages. It could take a messages, just going to be equal to an empty array if there's nothing there, as well as a name, and that's going to be equal to community if nothing is passed in, and then users, which are the users connected or in this chat, which is going to be an empty array, and we're going to make that equal to that. So what this equals object thing does that if they don't even pass in an object, if they don't pass in an object at all, it'll still be equal to, it'll set this object right here to all these regular values. All right, so now we're going to return an object as well here, just like that, and then we're going to say ID is uuid v4. And then we're also going to send back a name, message, and all those things. Name, messages, users, and typing users, which is the users currently typing. And that's going to be equal to an empty array. All right, so also, if you didn't know, this me putting just name here is the same thing as me putting name, colon name, and messages, colon messages. It's just a little bit shorter syntax from ES6. Also, these right here for our initial values are actually supposed to be equal signs. So let's go ahead and change those to equal signs like that. And equal sign right there. And one more for our name right there. All right, so next up, we're going to add a login form so our users can log in with a username, just a username, because password would be too much for this. Here we go. So right down here in our layout.js, we're going to add a React component called login form. And this login form is going to take two props, the prop for the socket that it can use to emit to the socket, and then also the set user function that it's going to use to go back up to this component and set the user. So it's just going to use this set user function just like that. All right, so now let's go ahead and import that before we make it. Import login form from, and this is going to be right in here. So login, actually it's going to be one up. We're going to put it one up. No, we'll put it in here. Login form, just like that. And right here in components, we're going to make a new file and call it loginform.js. Okay, then we're going to make a React component just like that. And now inside here, we're going to have our login form. So our render function is going to have a div with a container and class name of login, just like that. And we're going to have a few other things. We're going to have a form. Wow, not a from, but a form. It's not going to have an action, but it is going to have an onSubmit property. And it's going to take this dot handle submit, which we'll make in a second in this component. This is also going to take another thing, and that's just going to be a class name. And these are just styles that I have in that index.css file that we added earlier. Login form, just like that. All right, then we're going to have a label, and that's going to be for nickname, which is the name that the user is going to type in. That label is going to have an h2 inside of it with a that just says got a nickname, and then an input that's going to have a few properties on it, but it is going to be of type text. First, we're just going to have a reference on this. And that's just a reference that we use in React. So reference is going to equal this dot text input equals input. And then right below that, we're going to have an ID of nickname so we can attach that label to this. And then a value of nickname, which is going to be a React state in this login form. And type equals, we already have type actually. We're not going to do type. We're going to do on change. And we're going to have something that handles the change. We're going to say handle change. And then one more thing, and that's just going to be a placeholder. And that placeholder is just going to be my cool username. All right, so now let's go ahead and make a few of those things. First, right here at the top, we're going to make our constructor. Constructor is going to have our props passed in, and then those props passed to the super function. And then right here, we are going to have a state that just has a nickname and an error. Oh, I did forget to go ahead and put error in our markup at the bottom. So let's go down here back to our markup real quick and put an error right down here. And that's just going to have a class of error. And that's going to say if error is a thing, we're going to print out, or yeah, we're going to print out the error. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. Great. And then now right here in our render function, we're going to get those variables. So const nickname and error, and that's going to be from our this.state. And let's go ahead and go look at our application. Okay, so it looks like I forgot to get the logout from our events.js and also forgot to initialize a variable for our socket.js in our layout. So if we go to our layout real quick, we'll go ahead and get that logout constant. And then also down here, we're going to get the socket, and that's going to be equal to this dot state. And if we go back, we should have that. Oh, login form needs to export default. And good, there's our login form. We can't type in here yet because we haven't handled the on change. So let's go ahead and do that. Down here in our login form, just get that away and make this a little bit bigger. We're going to say handle submit equals this, and handle change equals this. All right, so for our handle submit, what we're going to do is we're going to get an event from the form here. So whenever this on submit happens, there's an event that happens, and it's going to be passed up to this function right here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prevent default. We're going to say prevent default so it doesn't submit it to the server or anything. It just stays on our application. And then we're going to get the socket from our props. Say this dots props, and also get the nickname from our states. So const nickname this dot state, and then we're going to emit something to the server, and that's going to be socket.emit, and we're going to emit verify user. Let's go ahead and import that up here. So import verify underscore user from, and let's go ahead and see where that is at. Verify user, our events.js is just one up, so we go events, nope, no.js. So verify user, perfect. So then we can use it down here, verify user. And verify user is going to take two things. That's going to be a nickname, the nickname that we have in our thing right here. And also it's going to take a callback function, and that's going to be this dot props dot set user. Actually, it's just going to be this dot set user. All right. And then let's go ahead and do our handle change as well. Handle change is just going to say for that event that happens. So whenever this is submitted, whenever this changes, that event's going to be passed to it. And we're going to set our state. And the state is just going to change our nickname to the event.targets.value. Great. So if we go back to our thing here, we should be able to just change this no problem, unlike how we couldn't do it before. Let's go right up here and make our set user function. Set user is going to be equal to this. And what set user is going to get is it's going to get a user to, it's actually going to get an object that has a user and a isUser property. And you'll see what that is in a second. But it's going to take those two things, and we're going to say if isUser, we are going to set the error for our thing here. So we're going to say this dot set error, which will make that in a second as well. Set error to be equal to username taken. And then else, we're going to say this dot props dot set user, and then send the user to that. So what happens is the server, the socket.io server sends an object that has isUser, which is a boolean, and user, which is just a user object, and it's going to say if that is true, we're going to set the error, and if that is false, the set user function that was passed in from layout.js right here is going to be called with that user in it, and then it's going to emit to the server again the user connected, so we can add that user to our list of users. All right, so now we have that set user. Boom. Last thing we need to do is make a set error function, so we're going to do that down here, set error, and that's going to take an error message, and we're going to say this dot set state is going to be equal to the new error that's going to be passed in. Perfect. All right, so now it's time to set up the server in the back end. All right, so in our SocketManager.js, I have a few things, a few documentations. So we're going to set up our events for our socket, as well as a few helper functions down here that I'm going to implement with you guys. So first, we're going to make a variable right here at the top that's called connected users, and that's just going to be an object that's going to have key value pairs of the username and then the user ID and the username with it. And that's just going to look something like an object in here that's called me or something like that. And then that's going to have an object inside that that's going to have an ID of whatever uuid sets as the ID. And then also a name. Wow, name me. So so you can see that for a second. And we're just going to set it to an empty object just like that. And now we're going to set up our events. So for our socket that we get from right here, we're going to say socket.on. Oh, we actually need to import a few things as well from our events.js. So we're going to say const dot, and then inside here we're going to go ahead and get verify user. I'm going to get user connected. We're going to get log out, and I think that's all we're going to need for right now. So then we're going to say that equals require, and we're going to go up into events.js. So boom, just like that. Now for our socket.on, we're going to have socket.on verify user, which is the event, and then that's going to be a function. It's going to take two things. If you don't remember what those two things is, like I don't, we go back to our login form here, and you'll see that it'll take a nickname and a callback function. So then we're going to say nickname and then a callback. All right, so now we're going to say if is user, which is a function we're about to implement. If is user, we are going to go ahead and use that callback, and we're going to send it an object that says is user equals false or true, is true, and then send it a user that's just null. But if it isn't a user, we're going to go ahead and send that callback an object that says is user is false, and then send it a new user, which we need to get just like this, create user, which is what we made inside our factory. So let's go ahead and get that. So we're going to say const create user. Let's go ahead and say create message and create chat as well. Get those. And that's going to be equal to require and then dot dot up factories. All right, and let's go to our factories and actually export those things. We didn't do that, so let's go down here in our factories and we're going to say module dot exports equals, and we're going to say create message, create chat, and create user are going to be sent back. There we go. So now right here we just say create user with the nickname. Is it nickname? It's just name. With the name of nickname, and that's all we need to send it inside of an object, just like that. And actually, we're going to go to the LoginForm, and we're going to console.log that response, no matter what. We're going to clog that response, user, and is user, just like that. So we can see that happen. So we got that, and that, and then is user, we're going to make that a function that takes a nickname and also take our objects here at the top, connected user, right here. So now down here, we're going to make that is user function or implement it. And that's just going to take a user list or the user object that has our key value pairs and a username that we're going to check for. And it's going to turn true or false if that username is inside of the user list. So we're going to say username and return username and user list, just like that. And actually, we can go ahead and implement these remove users and add users as well. So we're going to say, we're going to take a user list, and to remove a user, we are going to have to delete it from the object. So let's go ahead and make a new list equal to objects.assign and assign it to an empty object, the user list. And then we're going to delete from new list that username. Yes, and then we're going to return the new list. All right, and then right up here and add user, a little bit of the same. I'm just going to copy this just like that and say new list user dot name equals user, because remember that this is going to be a user object and then the user list, and then it's going to return that whole new user list. So we're going to return new list. Great, so now we don't have to worry about that. Now we have all this is user, connected user, perfect. All right, and now in our application, if we go to our application, you'll see in our console that we are connected. It disconnected a few times there, but that's okay. And if we do this, you'll see that our thing right here was emitted from, I'll show you that, from Socket Manager. So Socket Manager said it's not a user, so go ahead and try to make a user. So we created a user from our create user and sent it back here with an ID of that and a name of wef or love and all those things. Great. And you'll see that if I type in toString here, it'll say true. That's a username taken because when we make an object, this object right here, it does have a toString connected to it, which is good, which is fine because that means people can't override our methods. So now let's go ahead and do our socket.userConnected event. So socket.on user connected, and that's going to take a function that's going to be, I don't need it to be that. It's going to take a function that's say user, and it's just going to take a user object, and that object is going to be added to our connected users list. So we're going to say connected users, that should definitely be users. Connected users equals add user, and we're going to pass in connected users and the new user that we want to add in. And we're also going to set a variable on our socket ourselves, and that variable is going to be our new user that we have. So that user is now connected to this socket, so we can use that variable wherever we want in the code for the rest of this. And we're going to go ahead and clog connected users right after that so we can see what's going on. Great. So now let's go ahead and go through what happens when the user submits the form. So when the user submits the form, it's going to go ahead and say socket.emit verify user. And then that is going to go over to our socket manager. It's going to say, cool, we got a verify user event. It gets the nickname and the callback, and it says if this is a user, connected users. That goes down to here, checks to see if username is inside of user list, or in this case, connected users. If it's not, it's going to return false and return a new user. If it is, it's going to return true, and it's going to return no for the user. So now, once it gets back to here, it's going to go ahead and call this set user function from that callback that we have. So that set user function is going to be called, which is where we clog this. And now it says if is user, we're going to set an error. And if it isn't a user, we're going to set the user from our this.props. So now that goes to our layout.js. And layout.js is the set user function that we passed in from LoginForm to LoginForm. And that is going to take a user, and that user is going to be emit user connected, and user connected is going to take just that, just a user. So then in here, we take that user, we add that user to our connected users list, put that property on our socket here, and then we're going to clog our function. And one more thing we're going to do here is we're going to say io.emit, and this is going to be basically a broadcast to all the sockets connected to this current IO session, and it's going to emit user connected, and it's going to send a whole new user list of the users connected. All right, so let's go ahead and see that happen. We are here. Let's go ahead and do that, and we're going to say love. And if I press enter, you'll see that we got an error. Let's see what's going on here. Connected user equals add user. Oh, yes, I can't. This is definitely supposed to be a let and not a constant because we definitely want to change it. And if I do this again, you'll see that love was added to the connected users. And if I make another one of these, so I just duplicate this and say love, you'll see that it says username is taken. And if I say Leon, it should say username, it shouldn't say that anymore. I say Leon is now in the list of users. So all right, let's go ahead and fix that one error, which is if it is a user, we want to set the error to null, or set the error to an empty string, just like that. So now if I go back over here and I type in Leon, wow, Leno, yes, Leno, that is added to our connected users, and then I say Leno again, you'll see that username is taken, and then Lenove is not. Perfect.